thing that we've determined is that previously we thought anybody who was speaking had to have their masks on, but some diligent homework on John Kerr's part indicated that if you're speaking and you're 6 feet away from the audience, you don't have to wear your mask, but you do have to sanitize the microphone after each time. So there is a box of sanitizing wipes here that we'll be using occasionally to sanitize the microphone. Oh, that's a good point. We need someplace to put the wipes. So my name's Rob Mazza. I'm the Master of Ceremonies today. I'm also the chair of the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame Management Committee, which consists of 10 individuals from across the country. We have a number of them here tonight with us, and I'll be introducing them at a later date. I'm also on the board of directors of the Marine Museum in the Great Lakes at Kingston, which is the home of the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. Which raises the question of why we're actually in Kingston doing this event. And I got to fix my light here. And a number of people have asked that question, and some people have actually tried to have this event transferred to other localities. But the Kingston location makes a lot of sense for a number of reasons, the least of which the sponsoring agent for the Hall of Fame is the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes at Kingston. And the other reason, of course, is that our partner in the Hall of Fame, of course, is Sail Canada, which is also located in Kingston. Add to that the fact that the Kingston was the home of the host for the 1976 Olympics, as well as the fact that it's the home of Cork and is considered the freshwater sailing capital of the world. It's logical that the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame actually be located in Kingston. And the other reason, of course, is that if you look at either east or west, you've got some phenomenal cruising grounds. We come from Hamilton in our Corvette every year. We cruise the Bay of Quinte, and if we're lucky, we get to the Thousand Islands. So Kingston really is a logical place to have the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame, and most of you have had pleasant or unpleasant memories of sailing here, depending on wind strengths. And I just want to say a few words about the Marine Museum specifically, and I hope a number of you had a chance to visit the Marine Museum this afternoon before this event. It's, as you saw, it's definitely a work in progress. The Marine Museum is rebuilding after it was unceremoniously evicted from its previous site several years ago through the generosity of a generous benefactor. We've been able to get the site back again, and we're in a rebuilding mode, something that Chris West, I think, will tell you about a bit later. But pertinent to today's proceedings, the Marine Museum is not only the home of the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame, but it's also the holder of the George Cuthbertson and the CNC Yachts archives, which consists of over 4,000 individual drawings, dating from George's earlier drawings in the 1940s and 1950s, right up to the demise of CNC Yachts in Canada up till 1996. So it's a huge reservoir of design data on CNC yachts. We also hold the George Hinnerholder collection of drawings, as well as the only collection of drawings I know of T.B.F. Benson. And you probably never heard of T.B.F. Benson, but he's probably the most famous Canadian yacht designer that you haven't heard of. And he practiced in the 1930s. We're in the process now of trying to digitize all those CNC drawings specifically and make them available to people on the website. And we've actually opened up a separate donation form on the website for anybody who wants to contribute to that. So that's an ongoing process. The other thing I want to talk about as far as the Marine Museum is concerned is the fact that the Marine Museum was bequeathed the legendary sailing yacht Red Jacket about 3 years ago by the late Peter Milligan. COVID has prevented us from actually taking possession of the boat, and we will be taking possession of it this coming spring. And it will be sailing on behalf of the Marine Museum, taking people out on charter and hopefully letting anybody who has a passion for sailing history in this country to go sailing on Red Jacket, the boat that established CNC yachts. Actually, if you look around the room here, all these flags, all these gold, blue, and red flags are Red Jacket's flags from the 1960s, when she cleaned up on Lake Ontario before she went to the SORC in 1967 and 1968. These flags were presented by Perry Connolly to John Rothwell, and John's been keeping them for the last 50-odd years, and just recently donated them to RCYC, and Beverly Darville, the archivist at RCYC, generously donated them to the Marine Museum. And if you actually looked at if you had a chance to visit the Marine Museum this afternoon, you saw one of our latest acquisitions, which was a 1965 Suter-built Kirby 3 International 14-foot dinghy. That's one of two historic 14-foot dinghies that the museum has not quite taken possession of, have accepted into the collections. I have to drive down to Marion, Massachusetts, as soon as the border opens, in order to pick up a 1949 Gravette, Charlie Burke designed International 14-foot dinghy, which we'll be bringing back to the museum. And the other thing the museum wants to do as far as preserving the history of sailing is to initiate a register of historic Canadian sailing craft. And Red Jacket, of course, will be at the top of that list. But the definition of historic Canadian sailing craft is that it be designed by a Canadian and or built by a Canadian and be at least 50 years old. And if you go back 50 years, you're back in 1971. So a lot of the early CNCs are now designated historic sailing craft. So let me talk briefly about the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. This is an organization that started in 2005, and the only person that can tell the detailed story of that start of this institution is Paul Henderson, since he was there at its inception and creation. I gather from Paul that it was during a dinner in honor of King Constantine, I believe, the Royal Canadian Yacht Club, that in order to honor King Constantine, they created the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame, and the first inductee was Paul Henderson. So I'm hoping Paul will be able to elaborate that on in a few minutes when he does his own presentation. But it languished until about 2014. In 2014, the Marine Museum put on a huge exhibit called The New Age of Sail, which basically chronicled the birth of fiberglass sailboat building in Ontario and Quebec, and in Canada generally, in the 1960s and 70s. And for that New Age of Sail exhibit, we asked Bruce Kirby and George Cuthbertson to be the honorary co-curators for that exhibit, and they both accepted. And they both came here in 2014 in this very room, and were our guests at a gala dinner to celebrate the opening of the exhibit. And in order to do more than just thank them for coming, we inducted those two fine gentlemen into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame as the second and third inductees. And it was if any of you were here for that, it was a very memorable evening. We had 125 people in this room, and George and Bruce spoke very eloquently. And I should say the person that inducted George Cuthbertson was 96-year-old David Howard, and he was sharp as a tack. And our own Harry Gemet inducted Bruce Kirby for that event. Then it sat idle for 4 years until 2018, when we actually got around to, John Kerr and I got around to finalizing what's the word I'm looking for? the bylaws. We had to finalize the bylaws and put together a memorandum of understanding and put together a committee. And it was through John Curtis's efforts that we actually put that committee together. But the bylaws stipulate specifically that there is a category called automatic inductee to the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. And the automatic inductee is anyone who has won an Olympic medal won a medal in an Olympic class or a Paralympic class, or has won a world championship in a Olympic class. And when we tallied up the number of people who actually qualified to be an automatic inductee, we came to over 50. And so we wrestled with how to induct those 50 people. We actually played with the idea of inducting everyone at once, because if you're an automatic inductee, you should be automatically in the Hall of Fame. But we felt that would be giving short shrift to those people, that they should be honored on an individual basis. So we decided at that time to induct people chronologically. And of course, on top of those automatic inductees, because of the Olympic medals and world championships, there's a whole other group of people who should be in the Hall of Fame for other things besides Olympic sailing. George Cuthbertson and Bruce Kirby are two examples. So on top of that, we have to include these non-Olympic people who have to be in the Hall of Fame. So needless to say, there are hundreds of people that we need to get in the Hall of Fame, and which we are doing so on a biannual basis at this stage, 14 or so at a time. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. John mentioned the committee, and there is a Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame Management Committee, of which I'm the chair, and we have representation from across the country, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But right now it's the management committee who is choosing the people who would be inducted to the Hall of Fame. Ultimately, when we get through this huge backlog of people who are automatic inductees, we will open nominations to the general sailing public as well, so people can actually submit applications if the individuals meet the criteria. And we're inducting in 3 categories. We induct in the sailor category, obviously, which is the obvious one. We're inducting in a technical category, which is designers and builders specifically, and we're inducting in a 3rd category called contributors. Today, Lynn Waters satisfies that requirement, and it's anybody who has contributed to the sport of sailing, either in a management position, a coaching position, or a judging position. People who wouldn't be normally wouldn't be eligible under the sailor or technical category. So again, if you go back to the beginning of sailing in this country, which is about over 175 years ago, with the Royal Nova Scotian Yacht Squadron, you can see there's a huge backlog of people we have to induct. And which brings me to how we're going to pay for all this. And what we've managed to do is make this whole thing self-financing by basically asking people to donate money to the Hall of Fame. And we've had a number of people, and for this dinner specifically, this event specifically, donate very generous sums of money. And so there's a spot on the website where you can donate, and I believe there are donation forms here today if you want to pick them up. And I should also mention this is the first time we're actually broadcasting the Hall of Fame inductions through YouTube, through the efforts of Ken Clark. So there's a number of people watching this online right now live, and this is also preserving it for posterity for the museum website as well. So on that note, I think we should start the process of inducting our 14 inductors, but I'm first going to ask Rob Crothers, who's the Commodore of the Kingston Yacht Club, to say a few words specifically regarding KYC and I believe about the land we're actually occupying right now.
What could go wrong? Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Kingston Yacht Club for the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame induction ceremony. My name is Robert Crothers. I'm the current Commodore in a long line of Commodores at KYC. This year is a very special year for our members as we are celebrating our 125th anniversary. And for those of you who might be interested, I have a copy of our book commemorating that anniversary. It's called Setting the Mark. I'm going to pass this around, try not to spill your beer on it, or although that might age it appropriately. And if you would like to get a copy of this, please contact our office, or you can deal with it on the website. So just pass that to, I'd like to get it back. We're all very proud of our ongoing association with the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame and express our hearty congratulations to all the inductees. And please avail yourselves of our hospitality. To begin our afternoon, I would like to ensure we acknowledge Kingston Yacht Club's site in both time and history. Kingston Yacht Club is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. To acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognize the long human history of our location, a history that predates the establishment of all the earliest European colonies. By doing so, we also acknowledge this area's significance for the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live upon it, people whose practices and spiritualities are closely tied to the land and its waterways, and who today help us all continue to develop a meaningful relationship to this territory and its many inhabitants. The Kingston Indigenous community continues to reflect the area's Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee roots, and at this time there is a significant Métis community in our city. We recognize First Peoples from many Indigenous nations across Turtle Island, and we recognize the need for all of us to share our wonderful lands, waters, and cultures and learn to sail forward together. Thank you. There you go. Sure, good idea.
What's that?
As this goes around, would you please ask all the inductees to sign this?
Oh, I think you just did. The request was, as this book goes around, all the today's inductees should autograph it. So, as I mentioned, the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame is not a partnership, but a cooperative effort between the three entities, ourselves, the Kingston Yacht Club, and Sail Canada. And I'd like to ask Chris West, President of the Board of Directors of the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes, to say a few words about the future of the museum. Chris? Actually.
Distinguished guests, on behalf of all of us at the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes, welcome to this third induction event that we've partnered on. Thank you to KYC and to Sail Canada for this really productive partnership. Rob Mazza has asked me to say a few words about the museum, but I have very good news for you. He previewed most of it. So I was going to boast about our extensive yachting collections and the imminent arrival of Red Jacket and the pennants and so forth, flags. But I'm going to skip all of that. Rob, you addressed it very ably. The thing I would like you to know is that this Marine Museum of the Great Lakes has been here since 1975. We have really extensive world-class collections that go far beyond the yachting and sailing collections, not to diminish them, but we have over 50,000 ship plans in our archives. We have thousands and thousands of linear feet of archival and artifacts material and bibliographic material, a great maritime library collection, and I could go on. And yes, as Rob has alluded to, there's been a great interruption in our operations. We were cast out of our National Historic Site, the Dry Dock site that you've now, most of you seen, in 2016, through great good fortune and generosity of a philanthropist, a friend of the museum. We bought it back, and since then we've been doing a lot of really essential repairs, and I'm very happy to announce that the first phase of them, the phase that will make that place habitable again, operable again, has come to an end, and we're moving back in and operating from 55 Ontario next week. So that's something to celebrate along with your induction. And I'm going to leave you on that happy note. I greatly look forward to the rest of the proceedings.
I'm going to ask Don Adams from Sail Canada to say a few words on behalf of Sail Canada, our other partner in this enterprise.
Did you sanitize this, Rob, or do I need to? Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Bon après-midi, mesdames et messieurs. Hugh Magoo, Chair of Sail Canada, has asked me to say a few words on his behalf and to offer his apologies for not being able to attend this important Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame event today at his home club, the Kingston Yacht Club. Hugh and his wife Melanie, also a sailor, are celebrating their 30th wedding anniversary this week, so they're off about. Hugh has also asked me to mention that his skipper, Jim Blackstone from Silver Shadow and the C&C Yachts days, passed away last weekend, a reminder of just how quickly our time in water can come to an end. So Hugh's message: throughout history, sailing has leaned heavily on its many traditions, and events like today's Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame induction ceremony are a wonderful way for us to celebrate the past accomplishments of Canadian sailors. The inductees being recognized today have achieved significant milestones for sailing both in Canada and internationally, many in association with past Olympic medal wins. I also find it most notable and inspirational that virtually all of these inductees have extended their achievements across a variety of sailing classes and activities throughout their sailing lives. Whether we race or cruise, sail dinghies, keelboats, spoils, or kites, we all benefit from the technological advancements that continue to shape our experiences with the intersection of wind, water, and human imagination, and yet in the end, sailing is about people and a shared love of the sport in its many forms. Congratulations and thank you to each of our inductees today for achieving greatness in sailing and for being exemplary role models for sailors across Canada. In closing, I'd like to invite each of you to both celebrate sailing's past and embrace its future, and to remember that the sailing lives we live today will also be shaping sailing in Canada coming forward. Thank you, Rob, and the whole Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame team for pulling together today's event, and a heartfelt congratulations to all of this year's inductees for everything they've achieved for sailing in Canada. Thank you. So I take a few minutes to add to Hugh's comments. It's absolutely wonderful that we're inducting these sailors into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. Thanks to Robert and his team. It's great. Sailing Canada is a very proud partner of this endeavor. My job as a CEO of Sail Canada is to ensure this tradition continues, and we continue to have champions to induct into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. So at Sail Canada, we are helping our sailors achieve their Olympic aspirations, and we have many volunteers contributing to the sport who down the road will be very good candidates for the induction to the Hall of Fame. We've created an atmosphere, we think, within Canadian sailing where our athletes can be competitive. And I hope you've signed up to our newsletter so that you can be abreast of any new developments that are happening. We have a couple exciting things happening over the next couple of months that we will be announcing. So make sure you stay tuned. Today is about accelerating today's inductees. So congratulations to everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Protocol. I mentioned earlier the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame Management Committee. Some of you may think I'm doing all this by myself, but that's far from the truth. We have quite an active and very talented 10-person committee that spans the whole country. And some of those people are with us today, but the committee essentially started back in, I guess, 2000 and, well, even before the 2014 inductions. John Kerr and I were working on formulating the bylaws, and that was a back and forth, but we finally got that done. And then Doug Cowie, who was manager of the Marine Museum, was very much a part of this whole operation as well, and has been for all the inductions we've done up to date. And the other person that deserves recognition is John Curtis, because John's contacts with the people in the sport of sailing are second to none through Wind Athletes and his own personal Olympic campaigns. And it was John that put me on to the other members of the committee, and I relied on John heavily for some of that. And John actually suggested Dana here to nominate our East Coast representative, so we thank him for that. The Quebec representations from Royal St. Lawrence Yacht Club are Scott Morgan and David Cobo, who are with us today, and will be making we'll be inducting inductees later. Our East Coast representatives are Will Appold and Judy Luger. Will specifically was instrumental in getting Patty Ann Hatfield to come here for the 2018 inductions. And our West Coast reps are David Williams and Karen Johnson. And those two put in an inordinate amount of time in tracking down the descendants of the 10 medal winners from the 1932 Olympics. And we had representations of each of those families here to receive the plaque for those. So Karen was unbelievably resourceful. And I mentioned this category of automatic inductee. And it was only after I started exploring who all these people were that I found out that 4 of our 10 committee members fit into that category of automatic inductee to the Hall of Fame. And I don't think that represents any conflict of interest. And we'll be inducting one of them later today. But one last item before we get on to the actual inductions is that I want John Kerr to say a few words about some of the people we have lost recently, past or recent Hall of Fame members who are no longer with us. So, John.
So I'm going to go off script right now and drive Mazza nuts. But I just want to say one thing. Rob has been an incredible motivation to keep this thing going and start. He's been a catalyst in so much of what we've done. And the backing and forthing and the amount of detail, he's a designer, so we know he's a detail guy. It's been phenomenal. So I just want to put a round of applause for Rob. So I'm here to give a little bit of tribute to our recently deceased members of the Hall of Fame. And we've talked about what the purpose of the Hall of Fame is to to recognize individuals who've done great things in the sport of sailing and on an international level and who've made a great contribution to our sport. And although we make these inductions posthumously, it's even more important that we recognize the people within their lifetimes, so that they and their families can appreciate and honor the sport. Since we've last met, we've lost 3 of our great sailing friends and members of the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. All of them have given a lot to our sport that we love so much. George Cuthbertson, Big George, first appeared on the radar in selecting and optimizing the 8-meter Adventure 2 to challenge for and win the Canada's Cup in 1954. His legacy with CNC Yachts was unsurpassed and produced numerous winners like Red Jacket, Manitou, Bonaventure, Mirage, Merry Thought, and in 1972 CNC Yachts won as well 3 of the 5 divisions in the SORC. George was inducted in 2014 and passed away in October 2017 at the age of 89. Don Green, a member of the Order of Canada, best known for the winner of the 1978 Canada's Cup in his custom CNC Evergreen, and a veteran of one of the toughest fastnet races in 1979, and a challenger for the America's Cup amongst other major events. Don was inducted in 2018 and passed away in February of 2019 at 86 years of age. And dear Olympian Bruce Kirby, a member of the Order of Canada, who Rob Mazza wrote about recently, that no individual had a greater impact on the modern sport of sailing. And he is known and respected worldwide as the designer of the ubiquitous laser, with over 250,000 hulls out there as an Olympic class. Pretty amazing. Bruce Kirby gave me my start in my Olympic journey, and for this I'll be forever grateful. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame with his old friend George Cuthbertson in 2014 and recently passed away this July. We're fortunate to have honored each of these individuals within their own lifetimes, but I should point out today that 11 of our 14 inductees will also be honored within their own lifetimes. Thank you. Okay.
I was cleaning it up. Thanks, John. All right, so that's all the preambles that we have to get through today. So it's now time to get the show on the road, as it were. The way this is going to proceed is I'm going to call up the inductor that's going to make the individual inductions. The situation we have this time around is we have a number of people who are literally in the same boat, who achieved their Olympic medals in groups of 3. We discussed how to handle this, and basically we said that every individual who has received an Olympic medal gets their own induction. And so, the same person will be inducting these 3 people individually, and then if we can, we'd like to get them maybe up front here for a photograph. Failing that, what we'd like to do is get some photographs outside where the masking thing is not an issue at all. So maybe after this event, if you don't have to rush off, we can get some more photographs outside, because we want to actually put out a press release about this whole event. So I'm going to call on John Kerr to start the first inductions of David Miller and Eccles, and Paul Cote will be represented by his brother Bill Cote.
Sick of me yet? Look, I'll do this. Okay. I don't trust you. So I'm really honored and humbled to be here to and I'm happy to be representing the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes in Sail Canada. And I'm really thrilled to be inducting 3 great guys into the Hall of Fame. Now, if the truth be known and remembered, Dave Miller's Olympic career almost got cut short by a clumsy play in a pre-Olympic trials touch football game. Whoops, touch football. How's that work?
Not well.
I'll get my designer on that. Anyway, but it was cut short by a clumsy play in a pre-Olympics touch football team building exercise in Halifax in 1972. Tackled him. Paul Cote, John Eccles, and David Miller were bigger stars to me at that time than most of the sports heroes of the day, and I'd followed their exploits. They had a great boat. It was a blue Soling. No, that's fine. No, that's okay. Blue Soling called Terrestrial New World Cuckoo 2. And they raced it around the world, and they had some fabulous results. And I could look back then in 1972, and it was great seeing Sandy McMillan early enough, and we kind of went right back to that date as well. But I remember, too, the one thing about Miller, Cote, and Eccles. And I was a young kid back then, and they gave us a wonderful toast, a fabulous toast. All of us were trying to dethrone them that week. We all knew those guys were the ones that we had to beat. But during that trials, we had to go out in the ocean. Like, you had to get towed out forever. And on this particular day, the last race, they had it in the harbor in Dartmouth, if you remember. And they towed us in, and like towing us, and it was forever. The tow for the road, it was forever. Anyway, there's Cote, Eccles, and Miller in their boat being towed and going out there. Now, they had already pretty well won the trials. They had won the trials, but they came out with us. And I must admit that one of them decided just before the starting gun that the main halyard would fly up the mast, and the champagne broke out pretty early, and we all went on. But they were real sportsmen to do that day, so it was pretty cool. Dave Miller created a life impacting the sailing world both locally and globally. A 3-time Olympian, 7th place in the star class at the games in Tokyo, 4th place in the dragon class in Acapulco, and his bronze medal win in the 1972 games in Kiel in his Soling. He has numerous offshore racing results. They're phenomenal, including a couple of Admiral's Cups in England, Sardinia Cup, Kenwood Cup in Hawaii, SORC in Florida, Vic Maui, and the Transpac. Dave, can you come on forward and accept your plaque and say a few words if you wouldn't mind? And I'll clean off the mic when you come on out.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Okay, so it's good to see all you here. It's a real honor to be here today, getting inducted into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. I really appreciate it. I want to thank Rob Mazza for all the work that he has done to put this event on. And I know it hasn't been easy with COVID and whatnot, but I really commend you for all your work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to just mention one thing about our program, because obviously there are people that help us along the way. And one of the ones that I would really like to single out is Bob Brody. And Bob Brody was a past Commodore of the Royal Vancouver Yacht Club, a very successful business person, and a very good racing sailor himself. We needed a new boat to be competitive at the top level, and thought he might be somebody that could help us. So I remember going to his home. I was designated between the three of us. You know, Dave, you can be the guy that can go and ask him for a new boat. And so I remember going to his home, it's a lovely home, and knocking on the front door, and I had all my fingers crossed. And he couldn't have been more supportive, and bought us a brand new Soling. And hey, I didn't do that. I didn't do anything. But you heard the name of the boat. We did it. The name of the boat was Terrestrial New World Cuckoo 2. But that actually started from Paul Cote. And Paul was, he was the really bright guy. He was, into a lot of fun. So we would go to regattas, and he would try and really enjoy them. But one of the things that he did early in our Soling career is that he had this decal of a Roadrunner. We all know the Roadrunner. And he, put it on the transom. And we'd be going down the highway, and people would be coming by and beep, 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 beep. And So then, I mean, because he didn't have a name at that point. And then he said, well, look at the Roadrunner. It actually is a terrestrial New World cuckoo. Terrestrial meaning land, and the New World being North America, and of the cuckoo bird family. So anyway, that's how we came to the name, and we really did have a lot of fun in our campaigning, and we're very happy to have ended up with what we got. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay. Paul Cote. Paul Cote was one of the original directors of a group that became Greenpeace. He's given a lot back to that organization. And he also won a medal in sailing in 1972 Olympics with our friends Mr. Eccles and Mr. Miller. I met Paul for the first time in 1972 in Halifax, and I remember his wonderful drive, and I do remember how kind of funny he was and the team's chemistry. He was a really great guy. And back to that football game for a minute, if I recall correctly, it was Cote that was right there helping his helmsman off the field to make sure he didn't get any more trouble. Paul, unfortunately, passed away in 2013. So I'd love his brother, on behalf of Paul, if his brother Bill would come forward, maybe say a few words and accept a plaque on his behalf.
Thank you. Say a few words?
Yeah. That's for your benefit, John. First, let me thank Robert Mazza and Sail Canada for inviting me to stand in for my brother Paul. I'm really honored and touched. So who would Paul thank for if he was here to do it himself? Well, he'd thank all his family and friends and fellow members of the Royal Vancouver Yacht Club who did so much by driving the tow vehicle, providing the tow vehicle, as David has mentioned, for providing a boat. A whole group of us participated in fundraising events and in many other ways to give our support to this successful team. So a few words about Paul. He was a very intense individual in everything he did. Before the '72 Olympics, he was one of the 3 original founders of Greenpeace. Before the Olympics, he graduated from law school in the University of British Columbia. After the Olympics, he commissioned a local Vancouver naval architect, Peter Hatfield, to blow up the drawings of a Soling into a 41-foot cold-molded weekend racer cruiser. Turned out to be a very successful boat. The weight of the hull when it was finished was only 800 pounds. Paul was general counsel of Genstar, and after the breakup of the company, he participated in a management buyout of the property division. This took him to San Diego. What a great place for a competitive sailor to get to live. He joined the San Diego Yacht Club, bought a star boat, found himself on the race course competing against the world's best. Lowell North, Dennis Conner, Vince Brune, and a young upstart by the name of Paul Kayard. Later on, still at San Diego Yacht Club, he bought a 50% interest in a Nelson Merrick 68-foot ULDB named Maverick. It spent a lot of time in the Caribbean, based in Antigua. Paul cruised and raced with many family and friends aboard. I have a lasting picture of Paul in my mind's eye, a big smile on his face, while at the helm of Maverick with his great big steering wheel, as we raced past Shirley Heights on Antigua Race Week with the spinnaker up and the knot meter reading just over 25 knots. That's how I choose to remember Paul. Thank you.
John Eccles was a promising Finn sailor, and he looked like it. Strong and tough, driven and athletic, he rounded out this great crew. And it was my bet, my money's on Eccles for the guy that pulled the halyard up the mast that day. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. But John, if you wouldn't mind, if you could come forward and get your plaque and say a few words, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Remember that face?
Yeah. Nobody told me I had to speak, so I didn't. I don't have a prepared document, but I'd like to thank everybody here for being so kind to us, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I actually should point out that John Kerr and especially his people at Canadian Yachting Magazine have been instrumental and very helpful, and actually did most of the work in putting these plaques together, these presentation plaques. Without John's superb creative crew, Jill and the rest, we wouldn't have had all these plaques today, so many thanks to John for that. I mentioned John Curtis's input into this organization, and I mentioned that his latest suggestion was to ask Dana Archibald to induct Glenn Dexter, Andreas Josenhans, and Sandy McMillan. Dana is a fellow Nova Scotian, as are they, and sailed on the national team with Glenn's daughter Karen in 420s for a number of years, and is well known to all three of the inductees today. She's now practicing medicine in Kingston, and again I thank John for the suggestion of her taking on this responsibility. And I was pleasantly surprised when I found that Dana's father is my old friend David Archibald, with whom I sailed many miles on Mac Baxter's Charisma. So I asked Dana to come forward and induct Glenn, Andreas, and Sandy. And I should point out that Glenn unfortunately couldn't be with us today because of a conflict with a family event. So, Dana?
Hello everyone, my name is Dana Archibald, as I was just kindly introduced as. It's my privilege on behalf of the Maritime Museum, obviously I'm a maritimer, Museum of the Great Lakes at Kingston and Sail Canada, to induct Glenn, Andreas Josenhans, and Sandy McMillan into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. So, as you've pointed out, I'm a proud Nova Scotian, as I think most of us on the East Coast are. And it doesn't take long before I mention this, as many of my colleagues at work here know. Growing up sailing in our little province with these three, Glenn, Sandy, and Andreas, they were often around, running regattas, being mark boats, safety boats, chairing events, especially if you go anywhere on the southern shore of Nova Scotia. But my special connection to these amazing sailors is that I sailed from age 16 through an Olympic campaign in the 470 with Glenn's daughter, Karen Dexter. And she's one of my best friends. In fact, she was in my wedding party this summer even. So we are still close friends from our sailing. She was lucky enough to get handed down some of those good sailing genes from Glenn. And by proxy, she got knowledge from Sandy and Andreas. I was also lucky enough to be connected to that group that was backing her. Sandy helping us get set up with 29er and 470 sails. And here and there, on and off the water, we were getting tips from Glenn, Andreas, and Sandy. Of course, they're each individually being inducted, as we've pointed out, but it's pretty hard to kind of separate these three, especially when you're talking about the early days. They were the first Nova Scotia, or the first sailors to make the Olympics that were Nova Scotian, and that's a big deal for us. They were also the youngest crew in sailing in those games in 1976, of course here, Montreal. At that time, they started a campaign, and that was optimistic. Their team was first named, the boat was called Delusions, short for Delusions of Grandeur. Early in sailing, Glenn was famous for taking the slowest boat in the fleet and still winning the race with his feel and tactics and strategy and just intense competitiveness. A running joke, as these guys will remember, Sandy and Andreas wouldn't really let Glenn near the boat with any tools. Karen and I eventually learned that ourselves when we were competing and he was helping. We tried to steer him in the right direction. In contrast, Andreas wouldn't want to go near the starting line unless he knew that his boat and that his rig was the fastest one there. Sandy was the balance between these two, kept the team together and the boat in peak condition. As a team, they covered all aspects of sailing, from tactics to boat speed, and they sailed out of Lunenburg, home of the Blue Nose, strong marine heritage. They would actually, this was kind of news to me as I was doing some kind of research and digging and speaking with locals about them. They would row a heavy dory in the morning for their fitness. They bought a local sail loft and made and designed their own sails. They even re-engineered the soling. I don't know if I can really share this, but they jacked open the hull, put in struts inside the boat just to make it a little bit stiffer. That was quite a bit faster, of course. And I'm told that they were trying to hide this from the rest of the fleet. So I don't know if this is true, but they would apparently sink the boat every day to keep others from peeking in on it. This eventually resulted in, I'm getting it, I don't know.
We filled it with water, you're right.
Okay, maybe not sink to the bottom, but kind of, there was some hiding of it involved. But eventually it still led to an emergency change of the class rules. These kinds of creative shenanigans, they're not out of the norm for these three, from the stories that I've heard over the years from them, particularly from Karen and Glenn, of course. But they maybe don't want all of those told today. All right, back to their joint sailing careers. So they won the World Championships twice. They competed at the Olympics here in Kingston, and they came 8th. They've all been inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame in the 1980s, and they all given back to their sailing community over the years since then, in Nova Scotia and in Canada. They've taught junior sailing, they've run regattas that I've participated in for dinghy fleets. They've provided tuning and rig expertise. You can kind of see one of them in Nova Scotia on various different boats, different week, different race. You can see somebody on a different boat. And they've all been commodores of a sailing club. Okay, so just one more quick story about Glenn, then I'll read his acceptance speech, just since he wasn't able to make it here today, unfortunately, last minute. And then I'll say a few extra words about Andreas and have him receive his award. And then finally a few words about Sandy and have him come up for his award. So I've known Glenn for many years through his daughter Karen, as I've mentioned. We could pretty much always count on Glenn to debrief the race with us, whether we wanted to or not. And of course with my dad as well. As I mentioned earlier, we became quite hesitant, however, to trust his help with any boat work. You know, we would just let him help me learn how to steer the thing, because he's really, that's quite his strength, right? He's always got a smile on his face like Karen, but underneath that smile, he's fiercely competitive and very intelligent. He was on the board of CYA, well, called CYA back then. On his first day on the job, his skill testing question of the athletes was, who is the best sailor in the fleet right now? He said there was only one person who actually answered that correctly, which was Paul Tingley, and he replied, me. Please welcome me in congratulating Glenn on his induction into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. So I'll read what Glenn has sent here. So thank you for your understanding about me not being able to attend the ceremony. I'll be very well represented by Andreas and Sandy. Here's my thoughts about being inducted. I have to start with Sandy and Andreas. We were a team in the truest sense of the word. Unlike other crews at the time, we had no skipper. I steered, Andreas was more head in the boat, making us go fast, and Sandy was responsible for what was going on with the wind and other boats on the course. We all contributed equally, and our process for major decisions on the course was discussion and consensus, rather than just one person calling the shots. That was, in my view, a major strength contributing to our success. I could not have had two better teammates. 40-some years later, we are still good friends. Sandy and Andreas brought talent, dedication, and tremendous skill to our boat. It was a privilege to have sailed with them. I also want to acknowledge and thank the CYA, and in particular Steve Tupper, who was the national team coach at the time. We referred to him affectionately as TV Supper. Without the ongoing support of CYA and Steve in particular, we could not have learned how to sail and eventually win. There was equipment to purchase, travel to training camps and regattas, and untold expenses that went into a winning program. Without the support of the CYA, which Steve orchestrated, none of that would have been possible. We were also fortunate to have had really good Canadian competition. Chasing each other made us all better. Initially, until 1976, Paul Henderson was a very tough competitor. In later years, there were 3 other excellent boats. Sandy's memory is much better than mine. I'm sure he can tell you absolutely everybody involved. We all competed fiercely and drove each other to excellence. What remains is a deep respect and friendship forged through this process. In order to be a tiny bit better with our Canadian competitors, we had to become the best in the world. There were many international competitors that we formed friendships with. Many helped us get better. However, one stands out, which is Buddy Melges. He was a strong and very tough mentor and helped immensely despite stealing Andreas to sail and win 2 Star Worlds at the same time. One story sticks in my mind, won first Worlds in Chicago in 1975. It was a light air race where we had an abysmal start, so I ended up way out on the right corner and picked up a 30-degree shift that put us in first at the weather mark. Fortunately, the second boat around the mark was both a tactical genius and dead slow. The result was that at the bottom of the triangle, nobody had gotten past him, so we had a lead of about a mile. We carefully analyzed the situation and concluded that we were very fast and therefore should not change any settings, despite a 10-knot increase in the wind speed. Sadly, 2 other boats reeled us in and we placed 3rd. When we got ashore, I felt very firm footprint on my backside, Melges. He looked at me and said, "When the wind gets up, you have to pull the main sheet in." Looking back, it does seem like good advice. He was probably more upset at us not getting first than we were. I also remember that he was cheering louder than anyone when we thought the last race in Henko and won the first Worlds. He taught us an amazing amount about racing, winning, and being the best. I also want to thank Rob for organizing and the Canadian Hall of Fame, not to make us old guys feel better, but hopefully to inspire young Canadian sailors to take on the world and figure out how to win. You have done a great thing. Congratulations. Glenn. So now I'll just say a couple extra words about each of these 2 guys here and have them accept their awards. But of course, as I said, much of it is hard to separate with these guys. Andreas went on to continue dominating the sport of sailing in the star class, of course, where he won 2 world championships, as I mentioned, in 1978 and 79 with Buddy Melges. He was a crew on America 3, winning America's Cup in 1992 and competing again in 1995 on Young America. He has contributed to local sailing in Nova Scotia in so many ways, and with his dedication to this sport and with his talent. He has grown the sonar fleet in Lunenburg Yacht Club to be a very competitive one. He even has drawn people, including my husband from Halifax, to do weeknight racings multiple times in the week, which is really quite impressive when you're thinking about a commute like that. He was pivotal in winning the bid to host the Sonar Worlds in 2017. He still frequently competes in regattas. In fact, he may not know that, but just a couple of weeks ago in Halifax at the Prince of Wales, I saw his competitive focus on the start line, starting a about 30-knot race over 26 miles with big waves. It is now my pleasure to induct Andreas Josenhans into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. This one.
This is your good side here.
Thank you, Dana. That was lovely. That was lovely. Really nice job.
We have to change the battery of the camera.
So do I have to hold this?
We're kind of distant.
Yeah.
Oh, well, in that case, while I'm off the air, never waste a good opportunity. So, you know, Glenn's not here, right? He's alive. So if he didn't come here and he's alive, that means I get to pick on him, right? Yes, sir. Good. I will. So I remember, you know, when you come from the Maritimes to compete in Canada or internationally, whatever, everything you do, we just tack another 1,000 miles onto it. That's to get here. And then there's another 1,000 miles to come home, which is actually probably the reason we ever turned into a good team, because it took us 1,000 miles to debrief and pick apart every little bit. And I do remember one night driving from Halifax, and the snow started, and there's a boat in tow, and I don't think we had snow tires. It's kind of a miserable event. And ultimately the brakes froze and the engine wouldn't work anymore. So we crawled into the back of the van and went to sleep. I mean, what else are you going to do? Well, I thought I was going to sleep, but Glenn he had met this new girlfriend, and she was in the van with us. And God, Don couldn't come early enough. To be an Olympic sailor, to be good at anything in the world, you've got to put your time in, and you've got to put your energy into it, and it's one of the best experiences I have ever had. And all the way through later in professional sailing, whatever, you know, they really don't dive into the details like we do at the Olympic level, and trying to unearthing every last little trick to make your boat go faster, or to bother your competitors, maybe. We had 1,000 miles to think about the rude things we would say to Henderson when we got there. It didn't take 1,000 miles. We could have done that in the first 100. But then there are the other competitors, and I'm sure we were pretty obnoxious. Hopefully I'm not being quite as obnoxious as we were then, but I'm sure we were pretty obnoxious. You already had your vote. You've been inducted. This is my turn. Anyway, wonderful, Rob. Wonderful. The energy that you're putting into this is important. Good work. And Dave, where are you? Dave Miller, where is he? You were my inspiration.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Okay, and now lastly, Sandy. One thing I should disclose is that I'm friends with Sandy's son, Dan. I've been sailing against him for years, since I was a kid, just like with Karen. And I've of course been around while he tows half of St. Margaret's Bay Sailing Club to Cork here in Kingston. I've also, you may not really appreciate me telling this story. I don't know if Dan will dislike it or Sandy will dislike it more, but I've even witnessed his unique parenting style dealing with Dan. Dan had his first hangover here at Cork, and Sandy brought him a glass of what he thought was water, which was actually a full glass of vodka, just to teach him a lesson about that. But back to Sandy's sailing. So he continued to keep competing in events over the years, transatlantic on a Swan 80, offshore program with Triple Indy, and John Risley's IRC program. He's even brought his whole family for 6 months to sail to Bahamas, and that's a passion for sailing, because I believe they were all under 12 years old at the time, all three of them. He loves sailing in the incredible Blue Nose fleet in Chester. There's something like 30 Blue Noses on the start line at once. And you can, as I said earlier, you can pretty much find him tuning up some boat that's in Halifax at any given weekend or any event going on, including my own dad's boat as well. Today you can still find Andreas, Glenn, and sometimes Sandy racing against each other in the sonar fleet on Thursdays in Lunenburg at the yacht club there. And that's just a few kilometers down the road from North Sails, the sail-off that Sandy continues to run. So Sandy, please come up and accept your induction into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame.
Well, first, thank you to the committee Rob Mazan and John Kerr and other members of the committee who put in some hard evenings and no doubt weekends getting this ready, and all the other parts of this of the event in these tough times. And sailing for me is a life sport. It's a life sport for all of us, I think. And that's one of the beautiful things that sets us, or our sport, apart from others. Other sports, you do it, you leave, and on you go. In sailing, you do it, find something else to do, find something else to do, find another boat to sail. And the thing that runs through it all is you may not remember all the details of every regatta you ever sailed. Although Andreas is pretty good at that. He remembers a lot of stuff. But you remember the friends you made along the way, the fun, stupid stuff we did. Didn't get caught. Sometimes we did. And so for me, my life's journey has been about sailing, sailing with Andreas, sailing with Glenn, sailing with other members of the Nova Scotia sailing community, and some of you here even as well. And so Paul Elfstrom was once asked by a reporter, what's your best sailing memory? And he just said, a good race. The reporter didn't really get it, because the same feeling we all feel when we have a good race or a good time in the water, that's the best feeling in sailing. So I'll leave you with all of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana, for that. Very well done. I'm going to call on Karen McCrae in a few minutes to induct Karen Morch and Terry McLaughlin. But before there, oops, hang on, I'm back here. There we go. This is my favorite picture of Karen. Probably not her favorite picture, but it's a picture of Karen and John Bleasby sailing a Mazda 2 International 14-foot dinghy, a 14 that I designed and built myself. And Karen, very generously, before the start of a race for the Stevenson Regatta in 1988-89 in Hamilton, came forward and said, Rob, do you want to swap boats for this race? And I said, yes, because I knew she'd do a lot better in sailing my boat than I would sailing hers. And she hopped into that boat with John and finished, I think, a very close second to Huey and Jamie Kidd in that race, overlapping at the finish. And so I owe Karen a lot for proving the viability of that boat, which then led to the Mazda 3, which went into production at Ontario Yachts. So I call on Karen now to come forward and induct Karen Morch and Terry McLaughlin.
Thank you, Rob, for sharing that story. Hall of Fame members, today's inductees and fellow sailors. It is my great pleasure to speak to you about an amazing sailor, athlete, dancer, and human being, Karen Morch. Karen's first memory of sailing is as an 8-year-old in Toronto Bay. She's with her dad on a Tempest, dangling from the wire. She absolutely loved it. No more dance camps for her. It was off to junior club at the RCYC. I first met Karen when she would show up at laser regattas, all 5'4" of her, 115 pounds, an enthusiastic Minnie Mouse among the motley and ragged gang at the Water Rats. Later, she started sailing with her crew, Perry Camiso, in the 420. Good move, Karen. In 1979, their first year in the class, they finished second at the Canadians, qualifying to sail for Canada at the Women's Worlds in Denmark, home of her seafaring ancestors. In 1980, Karen's friend Rains Kobe introduced her to the windsurfer. It was love at first sail. The dancer in her got to move her body in new ways. Her back arm became the vang and mainsheet. Her front arm controlled the mast rake, while she angled her torso to optimal advantage, propelling her board through the wind and waves. In the summer, she taught every day at Cherry Beach, practicing her freestyle moves. Winters were spent in Australia, training in big waves and big winds. All that training paid off, with Karen winning the Windsurfer Worlds in 1983 in Kingston. There were 400 competitors from 27 countries, including 85 women. She port-tacked the fleet and won the course racing. And her dance training and athleticism dominated in the freestyle. Karen can pirouette like a ballerina and do the splits like a gymnast. This incredible photo was taken at the Worlds and first appeared in the Kingston Wig Standard. Now, hands up if you can do what Karen's doing in this picture. I didn't think so. In 1984, windsurfing was a demonstration event in the LA Olympics. It was different from the other sailing events in a lot of ways. While the Mistral sailors in Long Beach slid off their boards in what was described as an oil glob shit show, the windsurfers enjoyed perfect conditions in Santa Barbara. Instead of one boat per country, sailors qualified by region, in our case, Canada plus the Caribbean. And in a groundbreaking move, windsurfing had separate men's and women's events. What's more, the format was a real test of all-roundedness, with 4 events: a triangle race, a long-distance race, freestyle, choreographed to music, and the slalom. Karen finished first in the triangle and long-distance races, second in the freestyle, and 5th in the slalom to take the gold medal. Congratulations, Karen. How did she become best in the world? Well, her experience racing dinghies and dance skills proved a powerful combination. But perhaps more importantly, Karen was part of an incredible cohort who pushed her to excel. At the RCYC Junior Club, her best buddies included future Olympic medalists Frank McLaughlin and Johnny Millen, while in the windsurfer she had world champions Rains Kobe and Derek Wolf as teammates and training partners. These days, Karen still sails on Toronto Bay. Every Wednesday night during the summer, she races the Shark with her and my dear friend and women's team veteran, the indomitable Joanna Kidd. Joanna, I know you're watching if you ever need crew. Dear friends, it is my great pleasure, on behalf of the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes at Kingston and Sail Canada, to induct Karen Morch into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame.
Okay, I'm going to really try hard not to get teary here, because I'm in company here of so many sailors here that I call sort of the giants of sailing in my history of being at the RCYC Junior Club. And seeing you all here today is very, very moving. And I guess we got to do theoretically this little sanitary thing here. Here we go. Well, first of all, I really want to thank all of the hard work again that was done here, and specifically, Ron, thank you so much for your amazing guidance of all the logistics of this coming together, but also the personal support that you gave me. I appreciate it so much. So Kingston, I'm a big fan of the museum being here. This is kind of home base for me, other than down in the swampy Lake Ontario of Toronto Bay. This was the home of my grandparents. I spent a lot of time cruising here with my quite large family. I don't know how my parents did it, having 6 kids on a very 30-foot boat and sailing through the Thousand Islands. Tremendous experience for us. I taught sailing here. I sailed with Tony Snell in the Queen's collegial sailing team. I think I just missed you, Terry. I was here for 2 nationals hosted by this club, and then in the Worlds in 1983. The attendance in the Worlds at 1983 was pretty remarkable. 400 people coming from all over the world was quite amazing. When I went out for the first course race, I recognized the classic Kingston westerly oscillation, which I'm sure everyone who sailed here would be very familiar with. So I was delighted to see that, as I knew I just had to get the timing just right if it would work out. And as it did, the timing aligned perfectly with a port tack at the pin. So with 86 other boards jockeying for position on the line, I went for it. I just narrowly missed 5 boards on the way across the line and cleared the largest fleet I'd ever sailed in. So I have to say that was one of my big highs of sailing. Port tacking starts is very exciting, but in that number was extraordinary. I had 2 Europeans in hot pursuit right through to the finish, and I nearly jumped for joy when I got over the line, winning my very first world race, windsurfer world's race, a memory I'll never forget. After many years of being on the Ontario and national sailing teams, some might wonder why I left the dinghy world to start racing on a windsurfer. Well, I have to thank a couple of key people. Rains Kobe, who's been mentioned earlier, a dear friend, just somehow knew that as soon as I got on one of those boards, I'd never want to get off. And Derek Wolf, after the 1980 Women's Worlds in Denmark, in racing in 420s with my stellar crew, Perry Camiso, he hired me to teach at Cherry Beach Surf Club, which allowed me to get a lot of board time. We also trained every day after work and traveled to regattas almost every weekend. Derek inspired me to take more risks in my freestyle routines. It was really a fun challenge. I don't know if you've ever really seen freestyle, but it's quite something. It's a bunch of sequences of tricks, moving the board around, flipping the board around, which you got to see in coordination with music. So a perfect match for me. Anyway, that manipulating the sail on the board and refining really fast carving turns in many ways actually improved my racing techniques, speed and agility, which are essential when you have sudden wind shifts on a sailboard, unlike a dinghy. And if any one of you have tried out windsurfing, you will know exactly what I'm talking about the need to stay on the board, or you'll spend half of your regatta in the water and seeing the fleet sail away from you. One of my favorite yearly regattas was the team windsurfing worlds in Europe with Rains, Derek, and I. We made a fabulous team, and by our 3rd and final windsurfing world's championship, we actually tied for first in one of those painful moments where it had to be done by points, who won the first race. And so we were second in that, but it was quite an exhilarating experience overall. Team sailing is unique to the sport. It's like having a triple match racing event. So by far the greatest honor I've had in sailing was representing Canada in the Olympics, to have board sailing for the first time and windsurfing disciplines in the Olympics. Competing in Santa Barbara was amazing. It was a reduced fleet due to the qualification by region. It was the best of the best. The final event, slalom, was in very high and gusty wind conditions, and the course racing, as it was such a small one, extremely challenging. So I managed to secure the 5th position, and as I walked into the change room after the event was over, I wondered, was that enough to still keep the gold? So in a moment, after I was in the door of the washroom, I heard a knock on our women's washroom door. I'm like, who's that knocking on our door? I opened up the door, and there was Rob Bruce, who was actually running the event on behalf of Sail Canada. And he had this greatest grin on his face, and I immediately knew that I had won. So moments after that, Frank McLaughlin happened to pop on the scene, tapped me on the shoulder as I was standing in the lineup waiting to get onto the podium. He said, "So how did you do?" I said, "Pardon the salty, but," I said, "I just having won the worlds, won the gold." It was so wonderful to share that moment with him, and one that I will probably never forget. And last but not least, I'd like to say a great thank you to my parents. We have great ancestral genes in sailing, as probably most of us do have here. But I'm so grateful for Dr. Feelgood, also known as Dr. John Morch, but known more around RC as Dr. Feelgood, and my mom, tenacious navigator Sandy Morch, introducing me to sailing and being the mad, intrepid sailors, both on the race course and in their amazing adventures from all over the Great Lakes up to Alaska, Haida Gwaii, the Pacific Northwest, right down to the Baja, and decided that they would sail all the way to New Zealand just because they could. Anyway, well, I thank them very much, as they continue to be a great inspiration to me and to so many others. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for all your love and support, and thank you all for being such extraordinary sailors that I can model after. Thank you. There we go.
One day the gods on Mount Olympus looked down upon the earth and declared that the vast land of Canada needed more Olympic medals. So Zeus sent his daughter Aphrodite to Canada to seek out a worthy mortal Olympian. She found Paul McLaughlin racing in his 14-foot dinghy in Toronto Bay. To leeward was another dinghy helmed by a woman named Mary. Aphrodite then caused Mary to luff Paul. Mary luffed, and Paul responded, for he knew his rules. Soon after, Paul wedded the fair Mary. Then one summer day, after winning yet another race in Toronto Bay, Mary went into labor. The next morning, Mary delivered unto the world a son, whom she and Paul named Terry. And the gods gave Terry 3 gifts. Dear Olympians and fellow mortals, Terry's victories in sailing are the stuff of legend. Captain of the Queen's University sailing team and all-American intercollegiate sailor. Skipper of Canada 1 in the 1983 Louis Vuitton America's Cup Challenge. 2 times winner of the New York Yacht Club Rolex Invitational. Silver medalist in the 2015 Pan Am Games. World champion with Everett Bastet in the Flying Dutchman in 1980. And then, after being robbed of his golden opportunity due to the Olympic boycott, Terry fulfilled his destiny by winning a silver medal with Everett in 1984. Going back to Terry's birth, did I mention that the gods gave him 3 gifts. I don't think I did, but they did. They gave him 3 gifts. And what were those gifts? Well, the first of these is sexiness. Some of you may find this surprising, but in the September 1986 edition of Chatelaine, Canada's leading magazine for women, Terry was anointed one of the 10 sexiest men in Canada, right up there with Pierre Elliott Trudeau,
Paul Henderson,
Michael J. Fox, and yes, Paul Henderson. The second gift is superstition. Terry's lucky number is 17. He's had it on his FD, his International 14, Ideal 18, and all of his hockey sweaters. Every boat he sailed in the New York Yacht Club Invitational had 17 on its bow, stuck there with clear tape. Shackles must go starboard to port. And when he and his crew have a winning day, Terry insists that the next day they wear the exact same clothes. Same hat, same shirt, same pants, same boots, even the same underwear. 1 month ago, after 3 consecutive days of sailing in sweltering heat and undefeated in every race, Terry and Team Defiant won the Canada's Cup. Just imagine what he and the crew smelled like at prize giving. The third gift is superhuman smarts. Anyone who has sailed with or against Terry knows that he is super smart on the race course, a master of rules and tactics. I saw this firsthand when I was one of Terry's teammates at the International 14 Team Racing Worlds in 1985. Terry was our captain. Our arch rival, Team UK. In a tightly fought battle, we won, defeating the Brits due to stealth tactics on the water and Terry's persuasiveness in the protest room. At the prize giving, the team wanted to show our appreciation for our captain and how he made us feel. So, with Terry looking on, the rest of the team, the Kidd brothers, Jay Cross, Rod McIver, Martin Tenhope, John Bleasby, and yours truly, paraded in wearing dunce caps. Terry, that was just in good fun. Each of us, myself included, loved every minute of that incredibly intense summer. Thanks for being my captain. Hall of Famers and fellow sailors, it is with great pleasure for me to induct into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame the super smart, superstitious, and still sexy Terry McLaughlin. For you.
Well, how do I top that? I'll put this on briefly. Well, thank you very much, Karen. That was a wonderful introduction and induction. Yes, number 17 has been my number. Ever since the Zimmerman family and the McLaughlin family bought KC-17 Flying Dutchman from Hans Folk. I think we had, I can't remember, Hans was selling 2 boats at the time, KC-17 and KC-18, and I can't remember why we chose 17. The Harvey brothers bought KC-18, and the 17 has been my number, and often my kids' numbers ever since. Now, yesterday, I was sailing in the Champion of Champions at RCYC in Ideal 18s, and we had to draw boats out of a hat. And I was the second one to pick, and before I stuck my hand in the hat, I think Martha Henderson, who was holding the hat, said, "Oh, you're probably going to pick number 17. And what did I do? I picked number 17. Anyhow, I, like John Eccles, wasn't really prepared, but I made some notes over there. My first Olympic experience, I don't know if Dave and John remember, but I've reminded Dave the odd time I see him, but my first Olympic experience was 1972 when I was there as a kid after the Youth World Championships in Travemünde, and we were all us young sailors who would come to Kiel to watch the Olympics were assigned some tasks in the morning. So my task, and I can't remember if I had help or not, but I don't think I did. My task was to get up very early for a 15, 16-year-old, hop in the water in the Baltic and wash the bottom of Dave Miller's Soling every morning, which I did faithfully for most of the days until one day I was doing it and I stuck my foot in a jellyfish and I said, "Ah, hell, the boat's clean enough." And they won a bronze medal, so hopefully it was okay. I was born into a sailing family, as a lot of you know, and as Karen mentioned, my father was a two-time Olympian, very good 14 sailor. My mother, Mary, was a very good 14 sailor, very competitive. So I grew up on Toronto Island in the summers, at least, and just had the opportunity to go sailing. My three sisters all were sailors, you know, before me in the junior club and went on. One of my sisters is here. The other two, I think, are quite sure are watching on YouTube. And of course, my brother followed up with a good, very good sailing and Olympic career. So I was given the opportunity. No one pushed me into sailing, but I was given the opportunity. We had a wooden pram with an old cut-down 14 sail on it that we could go out and sail in the lagoon, or if we were good enough, tack out through the little cut to get out to the harbor. So I was just given the opportunity at a young age, and I enjoyed it. I'd like to thank a few people, certainly from I've had a lot of help, coaching and managers and so forth, certainly from the national team. My two national coaches were Steve Tupper and Pat Healy, who sort of guided us along. On the Flying Dutchman side, we had some coach managers that followed us around the world and did a lot of things for us. You know, not the least of, you know, going out in a small rubber duck in bad weather, but the first quadrennial, that was Bob Whitehouse, and the second quadrennial was Hugh Drake, who put a lot of time in to help us. I've had a lot of great crew over the years. I mean, some people think that my crew are either deaf or dumb because of the reputation I have, but they were neither, and I'm still sailing these days, including yesterday with guys I sailed with in the early 80s in Canada 1. Unfortunately, Everett Bastet couldn't make it today, but he was certainly the person I sailed with the most in both Flying Dutchmans and star boats. I don't think too many teams go from a Flying Dutchman to a star crew. I think we're maybe a little on the heavy side in the Flying Dutchman and certainly on the light side in the star, but we had some pretty good results in both. It might be dangerous to say in a room full of this talent, but in my opinion, Everett, if he's not the best crew member that in a sailboat that Canada's ever produced, he's very close to it. I think the Fogg family would agree. I've got lots of friends in this room. I haven't had a chance to talk to some people yet. Hopefully we'll hang around and maybe have a beer downstairs afterwards. But looking around the room, I realize how many friends you make. I know I've been into some situations with some of these people in Kiel, Germany, and various places in the world where, you know, if you did what we used to do, you'd be in real trouble these days. But we all seem to get away with it. I don't think any of us missed any races because of being chased by police, and as Jerry Roos stole the glass boot in Kiel. But sailing has obviously been a big part of my life, and to sum it up, well, actually, one thing I should mention is I did meet my lovely wife, Nikki, at a Flying Dutchman regatta in Spain, because her uncle was the Dutch measurer of the class. So sailing has been good to me, and as Chico Escuela, our sportscasting friend from SNL, used to say, sailing has been very, very good for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Karen. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that both Terry and Karen are members of the Canadian 14-foot dinghy Hall of Fame, as is Harry Gemet. I had the pleasure of inducting Harry into the 14-foot dinghy Hall of Fame. So I'd like to now call upon David Kovo to induct Everett. As Terry mentioned, Everett couldn't be with us today, but I think David has a few words from him.
There you go. Thank you, Rob. That's a tough act to follow. Kind of a double act, but I'll do my best. I'll start by saying it's a pleasure for me to be able to participate in this event as a member of the selection committee for the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. But it's a particular honor for me to have this opportunity to introduce Everett Bastet, someone whom I'm pretty sure most of you know much better than I. And Terry, I'd like to hear more stories later. This is being recorded, so that would be most enjoyable. Everett has been sailing since he was 9 years old, and racing since he was 11, or in other words, as I reminded him yesterday when we spent a little time together, for the last 60 years. I'm not sure he was happy about that reminder. His first major regatta title was in Western Canada at the Canadian Junior Pre-Centennial Regatta in Calgary when he was 15 years old. And 3 years later, you can do the math, he was 18 when he attended his first Olympics as a member of the Canadian sailing team at the 1968 Mexico Games in Acapulco. It's fair to say that Everett's sailing CV, like so many in this room, has been shaped by an Olympic career that in Everett's case must surely be close to unique, and I would say across all sports. But it also includes a number of other achievements. For example, in 1973, 2 top finishes, they've already been mentioned, one at the Flying Dutchman Worlds with Hans Vogt in 1973, and the other at the US Laser Nationals in a fleet of, he reminded me yesterday, 207 boats. In 1980, a second FD World Championship with Terry McLaughlin. In addition to leading 2 Olympic teams, he also served as team leader at the 2003 Pan Am Games in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, and the 2004 ISAF Youth Worlds in Gdynia in Poland. But let's get back to Everett's sailing career in the Olympics. His association with Olympic sailing has been long and I think amazingly diverse. In fact, and most of you probably know this, he's been a member of 9 Olympic teams over a span of something like 36 years. 7 times as an athlete, including in 1980 when Canada joined that awful boycott of the Moscow Games, and twice as a team leader. He represented Canada in the FD in 4 consecutive games, in 1972 with Peter Byrne in Kiel, in 76 with Hans Vogt here in Kingston, where they finished 4th. In 1980, with Terry in Moscow, of course, but boycotted, and in 1984 with Terry in Los Angeles, where they won silver. He participated as an alternate in a number of games as well, in 3. In 68 in Mexico, following his second place in the trials with Tony Zegers in the FD, then in 88 in Busan and 92 in Barcelona, in both cases following seconds in the trials with Terry, but in the star for a change. Everett's last 2 Olympics were in the role of team leader in Athens in 2004 and in Beijing in 2008. I think most of the people in this room know that wonderful book put together by Hugh Drake with the collaboration of Paul Henderson some years ago. Everett was one of a number of sailors interviewed at some length for that publication. And I think one of the questions all of you who are a part of that wonderful document will remember is, what are your 3 best moments in sailing? And Everett, with characteristic modesty, described his 3 best moments in sailing in this way. And I think you need to listen carefully, because it touches on so many of the qualities of the sport that bring us together here today. First, he said, it was walking into the Aztec Stadium in 1968 with 120,000 spectators cheering the opening ceremony. Second was winning the silver medal with Terry in Los Angeles in '84, which Everett characterized as the culmination, I think you referred to this, Terry, of 17 years of hard work. And third, in his new role as team leader, watching Ross McDonald and Mike Wolfs win silver in the Star in Athens in 2004. As you know, he's unable to join us here today. And those of you who know Evie know that he's a man of few words, although I don't know what he's like in the cockpit, Terry. I suspect he's as silent there as he is all the time. But he did send us a note, so I think it's best if I leave the last word to him. And I'm going to read from the very, not surprisingly, short note that he sent me a few days ago. I've had an interesting ride. I'm proud to have won 2 Flying Dutchman World Championships with 2 of Canada's most accomplished skippers, Hans Fogg and Terry McLaughlin. It is an honor to join them and our fellow inductees in the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. He goes on, he says, Terry and I raced 2 quads in the Flying Dutchman, followed by 2 quads in the Star. Those 4 quads add up to a lot of years with Terry, and then there were a few exclamation marks after that. He says we continue to sail together now and again, our most recent adventure being 2 years ago this week at a European Championship in a 33-foot keelboat with 3 of the 6 crew hanging over the side on a trapeze. Terry and I sailed side by side, reminiscent of those days in the Flying Dutchman. I would like to thank Everett Closes, Sail Canada, and in particular Rob Mazza over there, and all of those who have worked so hard to create the Sailing Hall of Fame. So on behalf of Everett and myself, Rob, thank you so much.
I can now call upon Larry Lemieux. Did Larry make it today? There it is. To induct his good friend Terry Nielsen, both fellow Finn sailors.
Oh, I guess you got to do this. I've written some things to say, but some of the comments that other people have said really resonate. And one of them was, what are your greatest moments in sailing, or the things you like the most? And I'm here to induct Terry Nielsen, and he has to be one of the highlights of coming to the sailing. Really a pleasure to hang out with Terry, if any of you have ever done that. So you just give me a second here. If someone was to write a book of Terry stories, Suffice it to say, it would be very entertaining. However, no one would believe it. I can't tell you some of the situations that Terry gets himself into, and somehow he just keeps landing on his feet. Terry has a great sense of humor, and over the years that we competed against each other, we had a lot of fun, as well as heated competition. This is all before computers, etc., so we made our own entertainment. In this department, Terry was the leader of the pack. Terry always would have something going on that would consume our attention and be a lot of fun. Fireworks, hang gliders, going to local attractions like Six Flags. Going out for anything with Terry was always an adventure. You never knew what might happen. All these adventures formed great and lifelong friendships. I'm resisting telling some of the many Terry stories, but I'll relate one of them that typifies Terry. We were racing at Kiel Week, and we had our world championship in Gromitz, Germany, about 100 kilometers east of Kiel, and we had to get our boats there. And we borrowed a vehicle from Wolfgang Goertz, who is a German sailor. So we just finished loading our boats from the car that we borrowed, and I'm looking around, I look at Terry, and he has this oh shit look on his face. And if you know Terry, it's kind of, you know, like this, what happened? I asked him, what's the matter? And without saying a word, he holds up the car keys. And I'm still confused, what's the matter? Well, Terry had broken the key off in the trunk lock. It was the same key for the ignition. So we weren't quite sure what to do. And somehow we managed to pick the broken piece of the key out of the trunk lock. We thought, maybe it'll work if we push it into the ignition and stick the other half of the broken in and try to turn it. That didn't work. So don't try that. So we had now we had a day to kill, or a night to kill, because there's nothing we could do about the car until the next morning, where we could get a locksmith and fix it. So so what should we do now? Well, I say Kiel, but we're actually in Schilksee, which is north of Kiel. So we decided, well, let's go to Kiel. And let's go to Kiel. So we got in a taxi, planning to take advantage of the brief break from our duties. On the way, we chatted with the driver, who was from Poland, and we told him what had happened. And we asked him about hotels, etc. But if you know what Kiel Week is all about, there's not much room in the hotels. Everybody's there, it's packed. So the taxi driver said, no problem, you can stay at my place. So we wanted to get something to eat and have a drink or two, and so the taxi driver took us to a nightclub and gave us his phone number and said, call me when you're ready to leave. So after dancing with Terry all night, we called our new Polish friend and we went and stayed at his place. The next morning he helped us solve our key problem, and we were off to Gromitz. As usual, everything worked out for Terry in the end. That's one of the amazing things about him. Things always worked out in the end. He's one of those guys who could fall off the roof of a building and he'd land on a pile of mattresses. Our time in Gromitz is another story, and it'll for sure be in Terry's book of adventures. Back in the day before the Finn, we raced lasers, which at the time wasn't an Olympic class. But we traveled across the country and internationally. We didn't have any funding. We did it because we loved the sport and we wanted to see how far we could go and how well we could do. Terry won the Laser European Championship in 1979 and then won the Laser World Championship in 1982 in Sardinia, Italy. At the end of that Worlds, another Canadian, Andy Roy, was second. The Finn class in Canada got a big boost from the 1976 Olympics that was held here in Kingston. At that time, the Finn was supplied at the Games, and Shell Oil bought 50 boats for the Games. After it was over, the boats were divvied up among the provinces with the exception of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland. Me being from Alberta, I had to write a letter to CYA and get one of those boats, and it was the last one available. So this was the start of Canadian dominance in the Finn class. I was the first to get I was first of that new generation. I finished 5th at the 78 Finn Gold Cup and then 3rd at the 1980 Gold Cup. Unfortunately, we boycotted the 1980 Olympics because Russia invaded Afghanistan, as we all know. Then it's when Terry came into the picture. In 1984, he placed second at the Finn Gold Cup in Anzio, Italy. And of course, Terry won a bronze medal at the Olympics that same year. And to continue the legacy of the Finn class in Canada, next came Gordy Anderson from Halifax, and he finished third at the 1988 Worlds in Brazil. Hank Lammons won 2 gold cups, 2 world championships, 1990, 1991. And at the 1990 Gold Cup, which Hank won, I was second by 3/10 of a point, and Mike Milner was 5th. So Canada had 1, 2, and 5 at the World Championship. I don't think that's ever happened in the Finn class, that's for sure. Then came Richard Clark, who was 3rd in 1993 at the Worlds, and Chris Cook, who was 3rd in 2005 at the Worlds in Moscow. So the Finn class has a great legacy, and it's hopefully still well, it can't continue now. It's out of the Olympics, unfortunately. One thing every one of the guys I've mentioned had in common was dedication and perseverance and talent. But there's one factor that was most important, separates the men from the boys, and that's toughness. It's not how fit you are, but how tough you are. Sailing a Finn or a laser is painful. No matter how fit you are, it still hurts. This is why Terry succeeded in both laser and Finn. He was tough, both mentally and physically. This is the intangible ingredient that every successful athlete has. So without further ado, it's a great honor for me, on behalf of the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes at Kingston and Sail Canada, to be inducting Terry into the Sailing Hall of Fame. There you go, buddy. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. I've got a short little speech here, nothing too long. First, want to thank Robert Mazza for doing a great job, and the many, many emails and the difficulty with COVID. Thanks very much. And you know what, a lot of us came from different areas as far as the sport of sailing. Terry was born from two high caliber sailors. I was got started in sailing because my parents were looking for a cheap place for the summer to get rid of me. And it was National Yacht Club. You could get rid of the kid for $75 for the whole summer. So I got put in there and got yelled at all summer by an amazing lady by the name of Louise Gardner. And she was, I guess, my age at the time, but she seemed like about 95. And she would walk around with a loud hailer and just scream at us, rig the boats, get the boats in the water. But she was actually a good sailor. She would run races every day. We had about, I don't know, a dozen albacores, sometimes 4 or 5 kids stuck in an albacore with the big life jackets on. So that was my introduction to sailing. But it was just racing, 5, 6 races every day, and it was a good way to start. After that, we were very fortunate, and still are, with the Ontario Sailing Association, that I think the first time I started racing was the 13 and under championships. Some of the people here must remember that. We go out and I think most of the races were in Toronto Harbour. Then it was 16 and under, and then it was the youth championships. And I think without that introduction, and then we would race albacores on the weekends. And it was just repetition, 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 and slowly you kind of figure out what's going on. And then I guess we started getting the laser at around 16 or so. I remember meeting 2 of my best friends on the Western Gap. I was going into the harbor, and Dirk Nolman and Rob Maru were sailing on the way out. We got together and they were training, and so I hooked up with them, and then we started training. Weekends, weeknights, and I think that the international sailing is great, but the reason we got, I think, to a certain level, racing against Larry and the Laser and Andy Roy and some of the top people in Canada, was just out of water rats, where a lot of us learned how to sail. And it was just repetition. You put your 10,000 hours in, and eventually you get somewhere. So I think a lot of us ended up at a
at the same place, but through different means. So again, just I got to mention Bill Gooderham back then and Alf Jenkins. You know, the weekends and the nights and the thousands of meetings they would have gone to promote the sport. Those are some of the unsung heroes that I remember that really made a difference. The other thing I just want to mention is that the reason I was able to get to the level like a lot of people in this room is because of training. And we all know training isn't that much fun normally, but I got to hang out with Larry, with Andy Roy, and a bunch of fun people. And, you know, the competition of training was the most important, but a close second was having fun. And I think if it wasn't for the fun, I don't think we would have trained so hard. And so we had just great times going to regattas to see all your friends, lots of European friends that I try and keep in touch with. One of the best training partners I ever had was Lasse Hjortnes from Denmark, who won, I think, 3 Finn Gold Cups. So part of the reason, at least for me, as a single-handed sailor laser and Finn, got to that level is because of those training partners. Because if you don't get along with other people in the Finn and laser, you're going to be sitting by yourself in a restaurant every night alone. You don't have the advantage of a 2-person crew or a soling or something. So I think we all got together. I trained with Larry a lot and Lassie in the Finn. In the Laser Worlds in '82, we did well. I was fortunate to come first. Andy Roy was second, and that's because the two of us trained in Australia for like 5 months before the Worlds every day for 6 hours. And you know, if it wasn't for him, there's no chance I would have won those Worlds. And same thing in the Finn. If it wasn't for Larry being as competitive he was and being such a high caliber sailor, it wasn't so much at the Olympics trying to do well. That was important, but it was trying to beat Larry in the trials was the hardest thing. So I was fortunate that, you know, some of the best sailors I had to compete against to get to that level. So I guess with a lot of us, we've got a lot of people to thank, and I think that we're fortunate with Sport Can, a lot of the organization. I know it's tougher now. I think the competition, it's much tougher. Everybody has to have a coach. It's much more expensive. I hope they have some fun. From what I hear is they don't typically go to the bar after every race like perhaps we used to. But you know what, it's still a great sport, and I've been very lucky. So thanks so much again for giving me this honor and among the people here in the room. Thank you.
Ken's making motions to me to do what? To do this? Start then? Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to call upon Paul Henderson to induct Hans Fogg, John Kerr, and Steve Calder. And we've all heard that Paul was the first inductee into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame, and like Karen, Terry, and Harry, he's also an inductee into the Canadian 14-foot dinghy Hall of Fame. So,
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be back at the Kingston Yacht Club again. And at my advanced age, you look backwards. And in 1969, I think it was, we started Cork, the Canadian Olympic Regatta Kingston, basically because the people from Toronto didn't want to sail in Montreal, and the people from Montreal didn't want to sail in Toronto, and who wanted to sail in Ottawa? So we came to Kingston. And the club did a great job. Cam Jones, Sam Legier, Barty Dalton, Harry, my great friend Harry, and especially the women, because the men took all the credit, but the women during the regatta did all the work. And it was a great regatta, and I sure miss the Molson tent that used to sit up there during Cork. And then we moved Cork to the Olympic Harbor. It's a great honor to be asked to induct Hans Fogg, John Kerr, Steve Calder into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. Canada Sailing had a marvelous 1984 Olympics, winning 3 medals and the gold in the new discipline of the women's windsurfing. It was a great regatta for Canada. Marnie Mcbean, our most decorated Canadian Olympian and chef de mission of the Canadian Olympic team, in Tokyo 2021 put being an Olympian in perspective. She said, becoming an Olympian is a life-altering experience. Winning a medal is a bonus. And that's, I think, anybody who had the honor of going to the Olympics feels that way. Hans Vogt first came into the sailing scene when he won a silver medal sailing the Flying Dutchman 1960 in the Rome Olympic Games in Naples, representing Denmark. I met Hans while sailing the FD at the 1964 Tokyo Olympic Games in Enoshima. Interesting, isn't it, that they used exactly the same venue this year as they used in 1964. In 1960, Canadian sailors were having a terrible time as we smuggled all our sails in from the USA. And the RCMP would show up and award us substantial fines. A group led by Doug Kirby, Bill Cox, and others decided we needed a top-quality Canadian sail loft so we could buy our sails in Canada and not have the RCMP after us. In 1965, I got married, and the next day we flew off to Alassio, Italy, to the FD Worlds. Hans was there with his new wife, Kirsten. Hans, by that time, had risen to be the manager of the Elstrom Sails Denmark. I broached the question of the folks immigrating to Toronto and setting up a sail loft. Kirsten was all for it. Kirsten's parents were the managers of the Everett Yacht Club, where Hans and Paul Elstrom sailed. Due to this exposure when a teenager, Kirsten announced that she would never marry a sailor. Fortunately, thank God, she married Hans. In 1968, at the Kiel Week, Germany, I was racing in the Finn and Hans the FD for Denmark, accompanied by the newly arrived Morton. We again explored the concept that Hans come to Canada, and prodded by Kirsten, they decided to come and explore immigrating to Canada. They came to Toronto, and we went to the immigration office for an interview. The officer asked Hans, "What are you going to do in Canada?" Hans replied, "Sailmaker." The officer spelt out Salemaker. Canada does not need those. I butted in and said, no, it's Sailmaker. The officer replied that Canada doesn't need one of those either. I quickly replied that Hans had apprenticed as a gardener in Denmark. So Hans came to Canada in 1969 as a gardener. Sail loft was very successful with Hans cutting the sail and Kirsten as the manager. Thomas, fortunately, was born in Canada. 1971, Ian Bruce conceived the laser and came to the Water Rat in Toronto and asked Hans to redesign the sail. When Morton was 14, Hans decided there should be a smaller boat because Morton wasn't very big. So he designed a new rig, and he came up with the idea for the laser radio, which Ian immediately started building. Both the most popular worldwide Olympic equipment for men and women. So I'm now going to ask Kirsten and Thomas to please come up and get the plaque, and I'll carry on. Come on now.
Pose together.
Yeah, you can have yours back.
I said my mom was going to do the speech, and she said no way. It's tough for me here to do this on behalf of my dad. Sorry. I told myself I wasn't going to do this. I'd like to say thank you to the Hall of Fame Committee, Sail Canada and Marine Museum for this honor. It is fitting that Paul Henderson's the one inducting my father today. As you've heard, it was his fault we came to Canada 50 years ago today. But with Paul's help, Mary too, because there's always a second person helping, and Paul had a handful of orders in his hand, my dad began his Canadian journey. From the laser to CNC to CS Yachts, many other customers, a business began to grow, which helped put Canadian sailing on the map. Even as he was building his own business, my father continued to compete at a top international level, representing his new country. He had many successes, but there's one accomplishment he still wanted to add to his resume. After winning a silver medal for his native Denmark, my father desperately wanted to win an Olympic medal for Canada. In '76, that dream almost came true, but ended in disappointment with a 4th place finish in the Flying Dutchman. It would take another 8 years before he could fulfill his goal, winning that bronze medal at the '84 Games. It was a proud moment for him, a moment he could give something back to Canada. My father was never one to look for glory, because he knew it took more than one person to achieve the success. In order to have that success, he needed a great team. He knew that his crew of Steve Calder and John Kerr was that team. I know my father would give credit for his success to these two great teammates and friends. He'd be proud and honored to have his name inducted in the hall beside theirs. And finally, if you know my dad, you would certainly acknowledge the support of Kirsten. I know you'd want to say thank you, and that his accomplishment would not have been possible without your ongoing encouragement and support. You were the best crew of all. And as Dad would have said, I'm 200% sure. I want to thank you for this honor, and I'm happy to accept this award on my father's behalf. Thank you.
That whole family has really supported sailing in Canada. Thank you very much to the folk. Fog with an H, people used to say. Folk is pronounced. John Kerr. John Kerr appeared out of the Boulevard Club when he sailed in the Soling with the Abbots from Sarnia in the 1972 Canadian Olympic trials. Fortunately, we were able to steal Kerr for the Royal Canadian Yacht Club, and I've had to put up with him ever since. Dennis Taves suggested to Hans that the young Kerr should help run the sail loft. I had the great honor of having Kerr and Toes crew for me in the Soling, competing in the 1976 Kingston Olympic trials. I can remember the first race. I was a dinghy sailor. I get to the weather mark, and I say to Kerr and Toes, I call them Toes, Taves, what the hell do I do if I broach? So Kerr put up the spinnaker, we broached, I fell right down into the leeward scuppers, and Kerr said, you handled that very well. So anyway. For 1980, I just lost it a bit because Thomas has got me. For 1980, the Olympics, Hans asked Kerr to crew with him in the Soling, but Canada ridiculously boycotted the Moscow Olympic for political reasons. As Larry said, for the attack of Afghanistan, and the Americans have been there doing what? And we boycotted. Kerr has moved on to his journalistic career and owns and runs Canadian Yachting and several other trade publications, and has served on many Sail Canada committees over the years. Kerr, you've given an awful lot back to our sport. Thank you very much. Would you please come and get your plaque?
You guys have heard enough from me today, so I'm going to keep it really short, but it's pretty humbling to look around this room and see everybody that's here. But I think if the truth be known, and Andreas mentioned it, he mentioned Dave Miller and Paul Cote and John Eccles, and those guys set our bar. And it was amazing for us to celebrate that win in '72 for them. And then having Andreas and Sandy and Glenn duking it out internationally for all those years gave us the foundation, gave Canada the depth in a sport that made us all really, really, really good. And thanks, guys, because it was a hell of a ride competing with you. And Dave and John and Paul, thank you for your inspiration very much. I need to thank Dennis Taves. He found me that day and got me onto Hansy's boat, and the rest is history. And Hans and I had a great career sailing together from 1973 right through to 2005, I think it was. And you also need to acknowledge Bruce Kirby. I was to sail with Bruce Kirby originally on a Tempest in Halifax, and Margot got sick, his wife, and Kirby did all he could to get me a ride with the Abbott family, and I can't thank him enough for that opportunity. Hal, Mike's sailing career has been so diverse, they've even had a chance to sail with Henderson, so it's all good. But on behalf of the 72 team that's here, I just want to acknowledge Pat Healy, because he's here with us today. He was our coach. He gave us everything and every bit of support he could. He did a hell of a job. I can't say enough about Hansy. I really miss him. I can't say enough about Steve. I really love the guy. One of my bestest friends in the whole world. And it takes a team of unique strengths. And sailing with Steve was a dream. Sailing with Hansy was a dream. And I just can't thank them for all they did on our campaigns together, and all their help and coaching and trying to teach me how to read the mainsail, which I wasn't very good at. Anyway. But I also want to close by just saying I need to thank Kirsten Foe. Because without her as our glue and our head cheerleader, I might add, I can assure you much of what we accomplished wouldn't happen. So thank you very much for this today. I'm really honored to be here with all of you. Cheers.
In 1980, Hans told Kerr, we call him Kersey in case you're wondering, that the Soling needed a big, strong monkey as the middleman. There appeared on the scene Steve Calder, who had worked for Ed Baird in a sail loft in Clearwater, Florida, who came to work in the Fogue loft in Toronto. Hans spoke no known language. We called it Dinglish, and he named Calder Two-Toe. Always called him Two-Toe, never called him Steve. And when he gets up here, you'll see why. The Calder Trophy for the NHL Rookie of the Year is named after Steve's uncle, who was president of the NHL so Steve has great ties to Canada. The team of Fogue, Kerr, and Steve Caldwell was formed to make the LA 1984 Olympic Games. They won the 1983 Europeans, they won the North Americans, and the Canadian Olympic trials. On to the Olympic Games in LA, where they won the bronze medal. It is a great tribute to Hans Fogue, John Kerr, and Steve Calder that they today be inducted into the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame. Steve, please come up. I got to get in a chair to hand this. You see?
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice words. Yeah, I came to Canada a lot of years ago, and it was a fantastic journey for me. I look around the room, and there's a lot of familiar faces and people that I miss, haven't seen in quite a while. Great sailors. We had a great team in '84. Hans was just a ball of energy all the time, as everyone knows. I've had a reasonably good sailing career past the Olympic Games with my work and as well, you know, sailing events and whatnot. And I would say that Hans was my teacher. I learned the discipline of the sails, the shape of the sails, the design of the sails, all that. It started really with him. He gave me all those opportunities, and can't thank him enough.
I mentioned that Paul was the first inductee into the Hall of Fame, and when that happened, there were no plaques, there were no memories of the event. So I'd like to present Paul with his plaque. For being well
You know, when you look around this room, this is Sailing in Canada. It's a great honor to be with you. Thank you.
I mentioned the three categories of inductees to the Hall of Fame: sailor, technical, and contributor. And our last induction today is certainly in the contributor class. And I call upon Scott Morgan, a member of the Hall of Fame Management Committee and member of Royal St. Lawrence Yacht Club, to induct Lynn Waters into the contributor category for the Hall of Fame. Lynn's going to be represented by his son, Alex.
Thank you, Rob. It gives me a great pleasure to do the introduction or induction of Lynn Waters. And really, it's for a personal note. Lynn was a close friend of my father's, and a point that Rob may not have been aware of, that he used to crew for my father in his CNC Corvette racing in Montreal and Lake Ontario. So there you go. Lynn represented Canada in the 1960 and 1964 Olympics and won a gold medal in the 1963 Pan Am Games, crewing in the Dragon class. However, his greatest contribution to sailing was in the administration of the sport. He was the chair of the NAYRU Appeals Committee in 1973 and 74, member of the IYRU Rules Committee from the 1971-78, chair of the ISAF Rules Committee 79 to 90, created the international judging system and became an international judge serving for the 1983 America's Cup. He's one of the founders of Cork, a past Commodore of Royal St. Lawrence Yacht Club, and was awarded the ISAF Gold Medal for distinguished service all of the time as a member of Royal St. Lawrence Yacht Club. I'd like to, my pleasure to induct Lynn Waters to the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame and to ask son Alex to come up and receive the plaque.
Oh, we gotta look good. You gotta look good, I'm okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. Since we're at the end, I'll be really short. I had no idea I had to say anything, but I wanted to thank Rob for, on behalf of my dad, who sailing, besides business, sailing was his life. He loved the sport. I'll just relate the only important thing I ever remember about sailing with my father in the Duke of Edinburgh Trophy in Montreal in the Dragon. We were leading in a fleet of probably about 30 Dragons back in the day in Montreal. And his hat, a lot of people who knew him, he always, not that hat, he had an even sillier hat, blew off. And went in, it was Sandy McDonald was the skipper. We had to turn around and go back and get it. There was absolutely no question about it. The boat just turned, we went and got the hat, and we did not win that race. But he did love the rules, and he loved fair sailing, and that was his whole shtick. He wanted to make sure that the sport ran properly. And so on behalf of my dad, Rob, thank you very much, and everybody here, he was a good guy.
Well, that brings to a close the 2020 inductions. Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame inductions have been traditionally, if you can call this the fourth induction traditional, every 2 years. That makes next induction actually next year. So I notify the Canadian Sailing Hall of Fame Management Committee that we will be starting work very soon on next year's inductions. And every year I say 14 is too many. And every year I think we're going to be doing 14 just to catch up and get through that backlog of people we need to get inducted into the Hall of Fame. I invite you all to meet with us down at the bar. We still need to get some group photographs of the winners unmasked and possibly outside if it's not raining. So I may corral you from the bar to take you outside to take a photograph with the plaque and with your inductor as well. So on that note,
We'll take the food downstairs and they should eat it.
oh yeah, we got all this food to eat as well, so we'll take that downstairs and you can nibble on that as well. I know some of you who have traveled a great distance want to hit the road fairly early, so we'll grab your photographs first. And on that note, actually, there's two emotions. There's two emotions I'm feeling right now. One is relief that it's all that we've actually accomplished this, and the other is gratitude for all the people who have come such great distance to be at this event. The people who flew in from British Columbia, from Calgary, people who drove 18 hours to get here from Nova Scotia, then had to turn around and drive 18 hours to go home. I'm eternally grateful for everyone who has taken part in this event. I thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.